Last year, we took a look back at the 2013 trade deadline 10 years later, and we mentioned this man right here, Marian Gaborik. In 2013, he would get traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Fast forward to the 2014 trade deadline, and he would get traded from Columbus in a trade that saw him get shipped off to LA. At the end of that video, we showcased just how impactful the deal would end up being for the Kings, because as we all know, it would lead to their second Stanley Cup in franchise history. But the 2014 trade deadline also had impactful trades, ones that also propelled teams into contention. But before we begin, this video is sponsored by SeatGeek. The NHL Trade Deadline is right around the corner, which means the season is almost at an end. Now's the perfect time to use SeatGeek to get tickets to watch your favorite team play live. SeatGeek is an app that allows users to purchase tickets to games, concerts, and live events. SeatGeek makes buying tickets simple as they rate them on a scale from 1 to 10, with the higher number being the better of the deals. If you haven't already, use my promo code IDGT at checkout to save $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek's been a part of the channel for almost 4 years now, so big shout out to them for once again sponsoring the video. With that, let's go back. The Kings' opponent in that year's Stanley Cup final was the New York Rangers, and they too would make a move that allowed them to make it there. They'd capitalize on a situation going on in Tampa Bay, allowing them to acquire a Lightning legend.
Lightning announcing a major blow for fans today. The team trading away one of its most loved players and team captain, Marty St. Louis.
This, technically, was never supposed to happen, as it stemmed from one main incident. Then Lightning GM Steve Yzerman was named the GM of the 2014 Winter Olympics team for Team Canada, and he elected to not include Martin St. Louis on the main roster. Marty took this as a form of disrespect, and despite being older in age, he was still an NHL and franchise legend and felt he had earned the right to play for the team, despite ultimately being named to the team anyways due to Steven Stamkos going down with an injury. The damage was already done, and the former face of the Lightning franchise requested a trade out of Tampa. The return for St. Louis sent shockwaves throughout the league. At the time, he was the captain of the team. The Rangers, who acquired Marty, would ship off a first-round pick, a conditional second-round pick, and their captain, Ryan Callahan, making it a captain-for-captain swap. Both draft picks Tampa would acquire are crucial to talk about. The first, Tampa would trade to the Islanders for 2 seconds, both of which were used on players who barely had an impact, and the Islanders would use that first on Joshua Ho-Sang. Not that exciting. However, the conditional second round pick was huge. The condition was that if the Rangers were to make it to that year's Eastern Conference Final, that the second would become a first. And as shown earlier in the video, they would do just that. The Lightning would again trade that first to the Islanders as well for a second and a third. They'd use the second to select Mitchell Stevens, but they'd use that third round pick to select Anthony Cirelli. Besides the Gaborik trade and the captain swap, other teams made some notable moves as well, including Edmonton trading Ales Hemsky to Ottawa for a third and a fifth, Thomas Vanek going to Montreal from the Islanders, Matt Moulson and Ilya Brzgalov going to Minnesota, and the Capitals, who were still on a quest for a goaltender, acquiring Yaroslav Halak from Buffalo for Michael Norvorth and Radoslav Klesla. Halak, funny enough, was acquired by Buffalo less than a week before the deadline in a major move that saw them ship off former captain Steve Ott and longtime netminder Ryan Miller to the Blues for Halak, alongside of a 2015 first, William Carrier, Chris Stewart, and a third. That first round pick would then get traded a year later in a deal with Winnipeg that sent Evander Kane and Bogosian to Buffalo for Tyler Myers, Drew Stafford, Yoel Armia, and Brendan Lemieux. So yeah, this one trade had that many implications and impacted 4 different franchises. But there's another trade that I wanted to mention that I feel had a bigger impact on one organization than many give it credit for. At the time, the Detroit Red Wings were on an insane streak, making the playoffs for 21 years in a row. But it was clear that the Wings weren't nearly as talented as they once were, and that their streak may be coming to an end. Despite the obvious looking at them dead in the face, GM Ken Holland would continuously ignore these signs and would instead make mind-boggling acquisitions in an attempt to keep the streak alive. And we'd see him make another desperate attempt to do so by acquiring a 33-year-old David Legwand from the Nashville Predators in exchange for Patrick Eaves, a young Calle Jarnkrok, and a third-round pick. Legwand would only play 21 games for the Red Wings before getting released into free agency and signing in Ottawa, while Jarnkrok, arguably the main piece of the deal, would go on to become a solid bottom six producer on Nashville for 8 straight seasons. And while, yes, the Red Wings would once again qualify for the playoffs, they'd get bounced out in the first round and would see their illustrious streak come to an end years later. Much like they are this year, 10 years ago, the Calgary Flames were attempting to be one of the biggest sellers of the trade deadline. Seems like some things never change, but GM Brian Burke hinted that they'd be busy, as they had a handful of pieces that could be considered valuable depth for teams in contention. They'd move a handful of players who were on their way out for draft picks in an attempt to get younger, but in all seriousness, it was still a relatively quiet deadline, with them only moving on from Lee Stepniak and Reto Berra, trading Lee to Pittsburgh for a third and Berra to Colorado for a second. Other trades that seemed minor at the time saw what we now know as big names get dealt. Tampa would acquire a young winger by the name of Jonathan Marchessault for essentially depth, and Devin Dubnyk would continue to get bounced around the league, getting traded to Montreal for future considerations. But another player would get traded away in a massive move that can perfectly wrap up today's video. A day before the March 5th deadline, the Vancouver Canucks would trade away longtime netminder Roberto Luongo in a deal that would see him return to Florida. Luongo was the hottest goaltending commodity on the market, and for Florida, they felt ecstatic, but Vancouver was pleased with their return as well, as they'd acquire a young goaltender who they were hoping was their future in net. That goalie, Jacob Markstrom. And now, 10 years later, as we get set for the 2024 trade deadline, the hottest goaltender on the trade market is none other than Jacob Markstrom. And maybe you say Soros.
Could it be that Marty St. Louis is on the move from Tampa to NYC? Tell me why, Stevie, why you don't see eye to eye with your captain? What you gonna do about Marty St. Louis? And who's gonna break the news to Steven Stamkos?